Dear students of Assam University, Silchar, Department of English, I have the pleasure to forward the lecture under the title Revisiting Coleridge, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which I am sure will be immensely helpful to you. Together with Christabel and Kubla Khan, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is unanimously acclaimed as one of the three precious, powerful poetic gems of Samuel Taylor Coleridge that bear true testimony to the Romantic poet's outstanding genius and his sharp romantic sensibility. Along with Wordsworth's Tinternabie, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner was initially accommodated in the first edition of Lyrical Ballads, which was published in 1798 and which is considered to be the Magna Carta of English Romantic movement. Needless to say, it was a movement against the 18th century neoclassical notion of nature methodized and against the gaudy and artificial poetic diction in favor of lyrical, lucid language, pristine purity, primal simplicity, elemental passion, genuine feeling and emotion, glorification of noble savage, naturalness, and more predominantly a return to nature. Viewed from this perspective, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is a lyrical ballad and a powerful romantic poem in which nature plays a powerful role instead of being methodized. Here it is pertinent to mention that celebration of nature is a fundamental feature of English Romantic poetry, of course, with regard to its many-sided ramifications. Arthur Compton Rickett aptly observes that Wordsworth visualized the natural by virtue of his pantheistic vision, whereas Keats sensualized her, Shelley and Byron philosophized and revolutionized her. Wordsworth's bosom friend Coleridge, on the other hand, not only supernaturalized the natural, but also naturalized the supernatural with considerable psychological and human touch. And this is all the more true in case of his three supernaturally surcharged poems, such as The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, Christabel, and Kubla Khan. Behind Coleridge's introduction of three kinds of fear in his poems, such as physical fear, psychological fear, and spiritual or moral fear, scholars locate Coleridge's profound allegiance to medieval beliefs and Gothic ballad tradition on the one hand, and Shakespeare's human, moral, and psychological treatment of the supernatural in Hamlet, Macbeth, and Julius Caesar on the other. The supernatural in the hands of Coleridge, as it was for Shakespeare, was not an abstract, shadowy, and fearful invisible entity, but a living reality. Keeping in mind the above observation, let us discuss The Rime of the Ancient Mariner as a supernatural poem, a lyrical ballad, a Christian allegory of sin, suffering, and expiation leading to spiritual illumination, apart from the eco-critical nuances with which the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is recently associated by the eco-critics and the environmentalists. Within the structural framework of 7 parts, the poem is formally designed as a romantic lyrical ballad in which the basic ingredients of the medieval Gothic ballad tradition are satisfactorily found. In the first place, it is a story of sin and suffering with a strong moral crisis experienced by an ancient mariner possessing glittering eyes and skinny hands, which is strongly reminiscent of the medieval ballads and folk tradition. The Ancient Mariner is in the opening stanza characterized as possessing glittering eyes and skinny hands, which is strongly reminiscent of the medieval folk beliefs and folk tradition. A ballad is as such defined as a popular narrative poem with a story which needs to be told in an effective manner to the satisfaction of the listener. As epic is divided into two categories such as primitive epic and literary epic, ballad is also classified under two heads such as folk ballad and literary ballad. Whereas the former is defined as a narrative poem of anonymous origin with emphasis on storytelling, abrupt beginning, dramatic development of action, repetition of lines and words, and a strong moral teaching. The literary ballads are results of experimentation in form, style, and structure, apart from the adroit use of various rhetorical devices such as simile, metaphor, alliteration, symbols, onomatopoeia, and lyrical diction, which make the poem all the more pleasant and aesthetically realizable. Viewed from this perspective, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner is primarily a literary ballad that retains, however, the basics of the Gothic ballad tradition. For instance, it begins abruptly with an ancient mariner dramatically detaining one of the three wedding guests to listen to his story and then holds him with his skinny hand and glittering eyes. In the opening stanzas, Collis characterizes the ancient mariner as a medieval hypnotizer who, by virtue of his mysterious physical features, exercises his mesmerizing effect on the wedding guest to arrest their attention till the story is over. The wedding guest had no way out except listening to the story of sin and suffering, which is reminiscent of the medieval magicians and practitioners of witchcraft who used to make the audience spellbound. I quote, "The wedding guest stood still and listened like a 3-year child. The mariner has his will." Unquote. The emphasis on mariner's will and the wedding guest being reduced to the state of a 3-year child shows that Coleridge satisfactorily subscribes to the medieval ballad tradition and allows the narrator to take up an upper hand over the listener, which is a characteristic feature of storytelling in the ancient ballad tradition. The abrupt beginning of the poem, I quote, "It is an ancient mariner." This can be correlated with the unexpected, surprising, and dramatic close of the first part, and this is a typical ballad feature which Coleridge had introduced in the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. The real story begins with the journey of the Ancient Mariner in a ship with 200 passengers driven by a storm towards the cold country and the South Pole, and from there to the tropical latitude of the great Pacific Ocean. Coleridge's romantic imagination is at its best in his graphic description and onomatopoeic presentation of the tyrannous and strong storm blast, its loud roar, and the wondrous cold climatic condition intensified by mist and snow, which is interestingly picked up by recent critics like Jonathan Bate to analyze the Rime of the Ancient Mariner in the light of eco-criticism and environmental discourse. I quote, "The ice was here, the ice was there, the ice was all around. It cracked and growled and roared and howled like noises in a swamp." Unquote. The dramatic appearance of a albatross out of the fog and mist gives a new twist to the poem. Coleridge himself characterizes the albatross as a Christian soul, and the sailors call the bard in the name of God. And the albatross is increasingly humanized because the bard comes and for long 9 days it flew around the ship as a protector and a divine sentinel, taking food and playing with the mariners, thereby vindicating the notion of communion between man and nature in romantic poetry. But unfortunately, with a dramatic twist, characteristic of the ballad tradition, the mariner killed the auspicious bard all on a sudden with his crossbow for no fault of its own. Part 1 begins with a surprise signified by the arresting of the wedding guest and ends with another big surprise with the sudden killing of the auspicious albatross. The end of part 1 raises a bundle of questions. Number 1, is the rhyme of the ancient mariner an allegory of Christian spirituality? An allegory of sin, suffering, expiation, and spiritual illumination? And is the bard a Christian figure and nature's veritable blessing? Second, is the innocent killing of the albatross an onslaught on nature, the benign mother? Third, it is a clear-cut indication of the future catastrophe that is going to visit the ailing humanity by nature in form of revenge. So these are series of questions that prick the mind of the 21st century reader. As the part 2 of the poem begins, the mariner realizes that he had done a hellish thing, I quote, and the other sailors accused him as a wretch and recalled with regret how the auspicious bard caused the south wind to blow as the protector of the human world. I quote, "The fair breeze blew, the white foam flew, the furrow followed free. We were the first that ever burst into that silent sea." Unquote. The killing of the innocent bard invited the rage and fury of nature and the divine world. The mariner had to suffer because he murdered an innocent bard, just as Shakespeare's Macbeth murdered the innocent sleeping King Duncan, and hence, I quote from Shakespeare's Macbeth, "Macbeth shall sleep no more." Unquote. Coleridge, who loved Shakespeare and called him a subtle-souled psychologist, has imbibed Shakespeare's metaphysical crisis in Macbeth in order to situate the spiritual and moral crisis of the ancient mariner, who has been metamorphosed by his crime against nature into a potential killer of innocence. Therefore, like Macbeth, he has to undergo terrible suffering and repentance to atone for his sin, and his suffering is not exclusively physical, but more predominantly psychological and spiritual as well. Subsequently, nature becomes furious. The fair breeze dropped down, the sky became copper hot, and the bloody sun reddened with anger. The mariners had no motion, and their tongues pursed and choked with soot, and in a state of great psychological discomfort, they entirely blamed the mariner for the innocent killing of the albatross, which occasioned the harrowing condition. And towards the end of part 2, they dramatically hung the dead albatross around the mariner's neck, which reminds the reader of the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. The suffocating human condition is here aptly stated by Coleridge with the help of the image of water. I quote, "Water, water everywhere, and all the boats did sink. Water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink." Unquote. Water, which is a traditional symbol of spiritual rain, is here ironically presented as an anathema. And in part 3, the matter goes from bed to oars, with the throats choked and black lips begged. The sailors could neither laugh nor well, and through utter doubt they stood dumbfounded. And the doors of agape, benevolent Christian love, and gramercy were closed for them. Uncertainty loomed large, and an uncanny atmosphere of supernatural fear is created. The mariners marked that a skeleton ship was drawing nearer, and however, it had a woman who is neither Mother Mary, nor can we presume it to be her son Jesus. It was rather a ferocious woman sitting on the skeleton's ship, whom Coleridge calls the nightmare life in death. And she is found dicing with her partner, death itself. Symbolically speaking, the playing of dice between the nightmare's life in death and her partner, death, points to the fact that the lives of the mariners hung between life and death, and that their condition oscillates between life in death and death in life. Though he lives in fear and anxiety, physical suffering and moral suffocation, the life of the ancient mariner is as good as life in death. And viewed from moral perspective, he is morally dead, following the killing of the innocent bard, and hence he experiences death in life. The description of the physical features of the nightmarish women not only reminds the reader of the medieval witches, but also vindicates Coleridge's art of establishing the supernatural as a living reality by negotiating the human and the supernatural worlds. I quote, "Her lips were red, her looks were free, her locks were yellow as gold, her skin was as white as leprosy. The nightmare life in death was she who thicks men's blood with cold." Unquote. Without drinking water, without a breeze, without a tide, the sailors experienced suffocation inside and fear for the dens of death, signified by the dice and 3-time whistling of the nightmare women and her partner death outside. The 200 sailors suddenly dropped dead, one after another, except the sinner, the ancient mariner. The soul of the dead sailors rushing by the mariner presents a ghastly supernatural sight, which is really rare in English literature. Coleridge's art of naturalizing the supernatural and his theory of willing suspension of disbelief is working here in unison with his powerful visual appeal, so as to make the incredible credible and the supernatural situations aesthetically realizable. Coleridge is a past master in creating dramatic situations and their psychological effects on the reader, and the wedding guest is filled with a nameless fear to hear the blood-curdling story and asks the ancient maiden not to tell the story anymore, and is afraid of his skinny hands and glittering eyes, long and lanky figure, and his horrible narration and art of presentation, which intensifies the situation of fear in a big way. I quote, "I fear thee, ancient mariner, I fear thy skinny hand, and thou art long and lank and brown, as is the ribbed sea sand." Unquote. As the part 4 of the poem begins, the poet unfolds the allegory of Christian spirituality with the killer of albatross, now left a wretched, lonely figure standing in the midst of dead bodies of his co-mariners. Needless to say, isolation and loneliness characterize Cully's romantic sensibility and his philosophical outlook. Viewed in an allegorical perspective, every human being is essentially a lonely traveler, and life is a sad trajectory of trials and tribulations in loneliness. More significantly, in a spiritual journey, human friendship hardly matters because what is required for the individual soul is virtue and goodness which he has accumulated to compensate his sins and sufferings in life. Pauli therefore describes the mariner's spiritual crisis in terms of fear, psychological torture, guilt consciousness, and physical loneliness. I quote, "Alone, alone, all alone, alone on a wide, wide sea, and never a saint took pity on my soul in agony." Unquote. It is now evident that the mariner experiences a spiritual wasteland in the sea, bereft of divine mercy, and his agonized soul is dramatically pitted against the death of his 200 friends. It is this real realization that matters. He looks upon the rotting sea, rotting rock, and the corpses of his friends below, and 1,000 slimy things living all around in the sea. Repentance for the sin and love for the beautiful sky and the shining white water snakes in the sea done upon his mind the noble thought that it is love, not hatred for the natural world that counts. Coleridge banks upon the notion of Christian concept of lovable and benevolent God. And the moment the mariner experiences a spring of love for the happy living things of nature, his purgation starts and his prayer is heeded to by the divinity. Part 4 comes with a dramatic close, characteristic of the ballad tradition, and the dead albatross hung around his neck suddenly fell down and sank into the sea. In Christian ethics, love and prayer and repentance never go unrewarded. Part 5 can be symbolically designated as recovery of the soul and spiritual merit, signified by the mariner's sound sleep sent from the heaven, which he acknowledges candidly as the blessing of Mother Mary. The mother's blessing unburdened his soul, and the silly buckets on the deck were filled with dew, and many more miraculous things happened which add to the supernatural glory of the poem. His dry lips and parched throat were drenched with rain, and the benign blessings of rain, wind, and moon imbibed his ship to move on. And beneath the lightning and the smiling moon that broke through the clouds, his dead friends miraculously got back their life with sweet sounds on their lips. The mariner deeply realized that all objects of the world of nature, both big and small, carry the divine message of love, or what the eco-critics and environmentalists of 21st century would say in terms of the message of love and let others live. This is the greatest ecocentric lesson that was learned and realized by the mariner, in that the biotic and abiotic elements of the ecosystem must not be destroyed or disturbed by merciless misuse or onslaught of nature, which hammers at the very design and constructive mechanism of divinity. The mariner now realizes that the sun and the moon had become pleasantly chuckling and glittering. The song of the little skylark, and for that matter of all little birds, filled the sea and the air with the sweet aroma of their songs. The warning stars dance and upper air create a pleasant atmosphere. The angelic spirits emerge from the land of mist and snow and guide the mariner's ship back home. As the poem proceeds through parts 6 and 7, the mariner was spiritually illumined after his profound realization that, I quote, a troop of spirits blessed, unquote. The two voices in the air, in fact, represent the two sides of the mariner's soul, one reminding him of his destructive and dark side that propelled him to kill the innocent albatross, and the other points to his repentant state of mind in which he has done penance through prayer and love for God's beautiful creation. The message as enshrined in Christian ethics is that human mind is a mixed fabric in which good is constantly chased after by evil. The message is that Coleridge wants to impart through the romantic ballad the fact that evil manifested through destructive passion of man needs to be subdued by good deeds. This is all the more true in case of the dark passion of the ancient mariner, subsequently followed by his repentance and ordeal of suffering. Part 6 of the poem opens with two voices again that add beauty to the ballad discourse, which has in fact many voices, which is strongly reminiscent of Mikhail Bakhtin's polyphonic voices in fiction. And this vindicates the fact that contraries characterize our existence, and the benign spirits guide the mariner's ship for a smooth journey back home. The mariner who fell into a trance woke up from the trance and wondered at the divine guidance signified by the gentle weather, the calm night, the glittering moon, and the ocean green. And what surprised him most are the stony eyes of his 200 dead friends who stood together on the deck with a new life. Viewed from the standpoint of morality, the rhyme of the ancient mariner is a moral allegory in which the mariners had a new life with a rebirth, with spiritual knowledge. The miraculous wind not only facilitated the swift movement of the mariner's ship, but also eased out the worries and anxieties, fears and tensions of the mariner. Soon, a band of seraphs welcomed the mariner, and it was in the words of Coleridge, a heavenly sight indeed. I quote, "This seraph band each waved his hand, it was a heavenly sight. They stood as signals to the land, each one a lovely light." Unquote. And soon there's cheering sound of oars, the pilot and the pilot's son and the holy hermit were heard, as they were all rowing out in a boat to greet the ancient mariner. The spiritually suffused mariner now hoped that the hermit would be in a position to absolve him of his sins. As is characteristic of a ballad, a series of dramatic and unexpected incidents and events take place to the surprise of the wedding guests on the one hand and the readers of the poem on the other. As the pilot and his son reached the mariner's ship, the ship suddenly experienced a whirlpool and sank deep into the water, leaving the mariner floating on the water. Now, symbolically speaking, this is a spiritual regeneration and the birth of a new life, which is signified by the pilot's boat, which can be contrasted with the sinning ship of the mariner that sank into the water. Spirituality finally defeated bestiality, and the mariner admittedly accepts the fact that everything happened under the supervision of, I quote, "dear Lord in heaven," unquote. In part 7, the hermit of the wood who kneels at morning, noon, and evening on a cushioned seat, strongly reminiscent of the 3 times rituals, Trikala Sandhya of the Indian sages, takes the center stage, and the repentant mariner surrenders himself to the hermit with all humility. I quote, "Oh, save me, holy man," unquote. The hermit's message or instruction to the mariner is that he should narrate his story of crime and punishment, suffering and spiritual realization before others. And this shows another aspect of the poem. It is not a mere lyrical and romantic ballad, nor a mere moral allegory on the solitary trajectory of a sinning soul, but more predominantly a confession, which is usually divided into three categories: spiritual confession, romantic confession, and secular confession. The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, reminiscent of St. Augustine's spiritual confession, and Rousseau's romantic confession, combines both the spiritual and the romantic ramifications with a brilliant message that human beings should love God's creation and respect nature and objects of nature, both tiny and big. The poem has a compact ballad structure, and it ends with an address to the wedding guest, as it began with the wedding guest. The mariner candidly confesses that after the revelation or narration of the story, his lonely soul, moving alone on a wide sea, is now relieved and unburdened from the tragic burden of sin. He also claims that his story is sweeter than the wedding feast, which was already over, thereby justifying the supremacy of the narrator over the listener in the ballad discourse. While bidding farewell to the wedding guests, the mariner leaves the greatest Christian moral lesson to the readers, that God is love, and love is God, and God can be pleased through our unalloyed love of His creation and His creatures. I quote, "He prayeth best, who loveth best, all things both great and small, for the dear God who loveth us, He made and loveth all." Unquote. The poem concludes with the spiritual realization of both the narrator and the listener, and we mark that the wedding guest, who becomes a wise man the next morning, to rise refreshed. To wind up, the Rime of the Ancient Mariner bears true testimony to Cully's romantic imagination and his art of supernaturalizing the natural and naturalizing the supernatural within the framework of a ballad. I mean a romantic ballad and a Christian allegory of sin, suffering, expiation, and spiritual illumination. The greatest topical and rather eco-critical message that the poem delivers for 21st century readers is that in any injustice to the natural world would incur the wrath of God, inviting thereby retribution or nemesis. C.M. Baura, in his seminal book, The Romantic Imagination, observes that the triumph of the Ancient Mariner is that it presents a series of incredible events through a method of narration which makes them not only convincing and exciting, but also realistically releasing, which very few poets of the supernatural have done in English literature. Thank you.